Our next speaker is Dr. Kaye Bowman, who I prefaced before. Her report's been released this morning through the NCVER website, but you also have a copy in your pack, so that can be some nighttime reading for tonight. And what Kaye's going to do is canvass what she has done in her research, which is industry restructuring and job loss, and helping older workers get back into the employment. The research was to identify evidence-based practices that led to successful skilling transfer, reskilling, training and the attainment of new jobs for older workers, particularly those who have been displaced from lower skill jobs. Kaye's going to outline the framework of strategies that were required that has been identified from past research and also 4 case studies. If you could welcome her to the stage, thank you.
That does it? No. Where do I press to have it come over? Good morning, everyone. I'm just sorting myself out here with the technology as to how it moves each time. What I'm presenting on today was a project that I did with Professor Victor Callan. He's from the University of Queensland. He unfortunately had long-term appointments for today that he was unable to change. Otherwise, he would be here with us. As was just suggested, Victor and I basically want to see if we could find some good practice or effective practices. We were focusing on the skills transfer and reskilling part. We found fairly quickly, though, that whilst vocational education training, which I'll use as the overarching for all different parts that go in there, is important. It needs to be done in conjunction with some other actions as well to be most effective. Nothing's working. Here we are. Just as a bit of a background, we've already heard a lot about this. We have got industry restructuring. We've just been saying it's an enduring feature of the Australian economy. There is, if you look at retrenchment figures, you can see that finding a new job for any retrenched worker is not easy. Only about half who were retrenched in the 12 months up to early 2014 got a job in that year. Most of them had to either change industry, change occupation, change hours work, or something else. There was an earlier report that, so it's difficult for all retrenched workers or displaced workers. It's even harder for an older worker with lower skills to find a new job. We've got John's work that shows us that a lot of older people retire by, default. And we were reading an Australian Workforce and Productivity Agency report, which was to do with the Automotives, which suggested we need a strategic response. It gave a short outline of what that response might look like. It mentioned we need to make sure we do cater for the most vulnerable, and that's how Victor and I got started on what we decided we would do. Now I flicked it right off. Okay, so it was pretty straightforward. Let's have a review of the literature. We did not look in Denmark, so it's good to have an added perspective there this morning. To the international level, industry restructuring is going on all around the world. We were looking for what are the key enablers or the key constraints. To give us a global picture, we were hoping we would come up with a simple starting work model that we would then go out into the field and do some case studies. We took a while to find our case study areas. We looked all over Australia. You can see the ones there. We've got the Hunter region, Geelong region, Adelaide, and various locations in Tasmania. All of these places have been undergoing restructuring for some time, so we knew there would be history as well as current efforts that we could look at. Now, this is just the literature review. Actually, there's a standalone, what they call support documents when NCVER does research on the literature review. This is key themes that came out of it, which is, so the literature review, I'm not repeating all that here. One of the first things that you notice is engage early. And long before a person's retrenched. I'm very much going to start to talk about the individual. We've got people about to be retrenched. It takes quite a while to sort yourself out as to what you might do and to do what you have to do to get there. Provide holistic programs. This comes back to, there's a lot more to it than just training. There's actually counselling, financial counselling, personal counselling, career counselling. There is then an early recognition of what they already know, prior learning step, then into the training. There's also all this to do with the job search, marketing yourself, getting a resume ready, knowing what a transferable skill is if you've been in the same job for a long time, which a lot of these older workers, male workers, our focus was on. They've been in the same, working for Ford, even their mother and father might have. They've been there for a long time. So it's not necessarily that they understand what's going on in the wider labour market necessarily. Very important, regional responses, as we know, it hits where it hits. And it's certain locations in Australia that are going to be affected the most. So we do need a regional response. We also need to make sure that in the training, this is a quick overview, in the training we need to watch out for, well, not in the training, but generally in age-related stereotyping. We've still got our discrimination commissioner, Susan Ryan, telling us that there's a lot of discrimination that we've still got to watch out for over 50s or so in the workforce, among employers. Do they get the training opportunities? Is that why they are where they are now, in terms of how much skills they do have? So we have to watch out for quite a few things like that. There's also, and I found, because we actually interviewed 18 displaced workers from Ford, Alcoa, lots of different groups. There can be perceived discrimination, if not real discrimination as well, that affects the person's own personal sense of motivation or possibilities of getting a job. So we've got to watch that. Even after, there might be a plan developed as to where this person wants to go. There does need to be upfront screening when it comes to the training itself to make sure it's the right kind of training. We have to remember, when an older worker, we need to make sure that it's age inclusive, and displaced workers are keen to get back into a job as soon as possible. They don't want any mucking around. They don't want to repeat things that they already know. They want it experiential, linked with where they think they might be going, a real job on the ground out there. We've also, as I said, after training, there's also job search, helping them do all that, and there's self-promotion. I don't know about you, but everyone can do with a bit of help to know how to promote yourself, how to describe your skills outside of Ford speak, for example, more general ways of describing who you are and what you are. So there's all of that. And this last one, effective partnering. It actually requires quite a few players to be able to work in a coordinated manner to get the full job done. I keep flicking it off. All right. When we got down to, so that was just to skim over the top. When we got into our 4 case studies, we found that all I've just said to you was quite true. And what we were able to do is to get into a little bit more depth. And we found in our 4 case areas, large firm and associated supplier worker transition programs, some of them special, combined Commonwealth, state, local, the whole caboodle, like to do with automotive. We also, though, we've got to remember the smaller businesses can also be transitioning. They might get picked up in the large-scale automotive, the supply chain firms, but they don't necessarily in some other areas. So what's available for anyone that's coming out of a smaller firm? And we found some what we've called open access transition programs. We also found some customised initiatives for the older displaced male worker. And I want to focus on all those three, and at the end I'll bring it together. Keep pressing that wrong button. Okay, on the large firm one, this is just giving you an idea of what we looked at in all of these. We had a look at the BHP Steel's work. We had a look at the Mine Hunter program. I spoke to some people in Adelaide who'd been involved in the Mitsubishi, and there was also Bridgestone and Clipsal, the current automotive workers. I was down in Geelong too, Ford, the transition program there. We've got Forest Works. I think we have people from Forest Works who will speak this afternoon. And we were looking at ACL bearings and lots of other small ones. Now, in all these, there's this staged approach to what happens. Now, this isn't a very good slide. It looks as though you haven't got your glasses on. At least that's what it looks like for me if I haven't got my glasses on. But just to give you an idea of the stage approach, yes, now BHP, of course, that was quite some time ago. It all started out with let's get the information out there, let's get the people that, all the workers started with knowing what might be possible. You see there's the personal action planning step, individual case management, explore options, lifestyle planning, counselling, personal support. You can't underestimate that step. Everyone kept talking to me about being absolutely shattered, even those that knew they were about to be retrenched. The actual day it happens to you, shattered. I've been hearing it on the television in the last week in Adelaide as some more, and that same word, if not shattered, shell-shocked. One chap said to me, I never heard another thing he said to me after that. So any information right then didn't get through to that guy because it was just, my whole life has fallen in. It's a life crisis, and we need to understand that. You suddenly haven't got your livelihood. It's going to affect everything. Your wife, your kids, your husband. In fact, it's interesting in Adelaide that they're actually on the lookout now for what's going on in the schools as part of this social phenomenon, of what could happen as more of these workers come off. So that's just an example, and you can see down the bottom, some may retire, some might go into their own business, some might continue in the same industry, some might go to another industry, some might decide to go on to a bigger amount, a large chunk of new education. I keep doing it. Okay, this is the Automotive Workers in Transition program as provided to me from the point of view of those in Adelaide that are looking after the Holden supply workers. But this is the general approach that they're taking, as I understand it, everywhere. Again, you see this staged approach. Let's get some information out there. We then need some career advice to work out where they're going. Let's get some recognition of prior learning, then get into quality training and training for as another employer or employee. Now, I'm just going to quickly run through all of these because I'm very aware of the time. Yes, I've already said, highly emotional experience. You've suddenly fallen off the cliff. And some people do get angry. In Ford, in Geelong, the first thing they did is buddy up, just in case people's minds aren't on the job. High occupation self and safety issue. Some person did go into the canteen and do it out of anger. There's all kinds of things that can happen. The career counselling, that is incredibly important. Everyone's different. Their whole life circumstances are different, so what's going to suit them will be different. They need to sort out their financial, where am I going, how much, if I do get a redundancy payout, how big is that? They need to understand, though, that you won't get any Centrelink payments for the time you've got that redundancy payout. Some people heard the first part, put all their money on their house, thought, they were told do something good with it, get the mortgage, and then realised they had no income. There's all kinds of things that you've got to carefully weigh up and make sure everyone's hearing, because I spoke to some career counsellors who had literally sat in 2 or 3 sessions with some of these workers out at Mitsubishi while they cried. There was no way of getting onto career counselling. This is why there's also the personal counselling that needs to start right from the start as well. Then recognition prior learning. Now this has to happen, as we know the way the vocational education training sector, before they've even left the current job. They have to be able to gather the evidence. They need to have third-party recognition of that work. Now Mitsubishi, when they, and John explained that it's worse times now, but in the Mitsubishi case, they did do quite a good job on the RPL. I spoke to some experts there, and one thing that vocational education training providers need to do is take responsibility for RPL. It's not something you can just throw it all at the worker and expect them to sort it all out. That will not work. They need to be stepped through the process. And if you do, then you can get some good results. Now, in relation to, you can get a personal profile going about who you might be in the future with your career counsellor, but then you've got to turn it into education speak to actually be able to get that recognition. So that sort of is a point where maybe the career counsellor and the vocational education practitioner overlap. I'm not saying the vocational education training practitioners could not be involved in career assistance, but I'm very disturbed, especially when I was down in Geelong, which was earlier this year, that vet providers are no longer necessarily trusted to give the advice from the point of view of the individual as opposed to from the point of view of the programs they have available and into which they want to put them. Everyone spoke to us about this career advice needs to be objective, and you really need to focus on that individual and make sure that you've got their interests in mind. And if ever we need to be flexible the way we do training, it's with this particular group of workers. So I'll talk a little bit more about the inside the training, but one thing I just wanted to say here about the training that is offered, we did notice there are differences at the moment in some schemes that will offer the tickets and the licences, skill sets, as opposed to full qualifications training. I don't know why some do and some don't, but that is happening at the moment in some different Adelaide, in the Automotive. They're not willing to pay for tickets and skill sets. In other programs, BHP earlier and all, they were. And the other thing, of course, is the big difference potentially between the large-scale structural adjustment programs, of which Forest Works is one, the Commonwealth State all the way through, similarly with the Automotive, and how much resourcing, therefore, these workers can get, which when you come to vocational education training is seen as fee-for-service, and we seem to be very good at being a little bit more flexible in the fee-for-service than if you're from a smaller firm that hasn't had all of that you probably haven't even been given 1 cent to do any training. You are relying on the way the system is funded as to whether you can get what you need. That's an area where I think we need to do some more thinking about. Then, of course, there's all the after stuff. A job resume preparation. Now, I spoke to one chap, highly skilled. He's up in Brisbane earning lots of money at the moment. He'd prefer to go back to Geelong. But I loved the way he said she crowbarred that information out of me about me over the course of an hour, and she got it onto the page, you know, which I could never have done, so that she actually has a job resume, and understanding what a transferable skill is, and knowing that they need to be all in your cover letter, all these things. That's a message that got through very clearly to Geelong, as far as I could see, all the workers that I spoke to. We clearly got that message. Searching for jobs, and I'll tell you a few different ways of doing it, and the actual self-marketing, promoting yourself, and there is this ongoing support about this resilience, about keep going. Like some of these people I spoke to, they were wonderful. These workers came and were willing to spend time talking to me because if it could help someone else, knowing what it was like for themselves, you finish your job, you're suddenly on your own. You've got to find your own way. You can only do a certain amount of searching every day and trying to write job applications. You've got to find some other things to do. And you can start drinking a bit more so that you can't go sailing like you normally do with your mates on the weekend. A regular skipper, he couldn't do it. He was willing to tell me. He got into a bit of a cycle there. Some of others that had been to see different people to get a few a husband, wife had taken him to her psychologist at her workplace, so that to just give him a few ways of sort of trying to bolster himself up when he noticed he was starting to get a bit depressed. So they're the 3 stages, and they're the kinds of things that need to go in each. Now, it all depends on the particular person as to how much they need all of this, but they could need every step of it. Now, when we came, one of the things we found is their holistic nature. They start from the, let's get the information out there, that's really important. Have there somewhere that they can make contact really quickly, find out all the services, then move through all these steps that I've just explained to you. They also usually have a coordinator, the workforce transition coordinator. It could be linked with the union, it could be linked with any group. And they were all older people who could relate to the workers themselves, and they were the critical linchpins, and often some of those were the ones that would do an early life planning session just to get them thinking about where they might go in the future and what they might do. There's a very big thing about, there was a mention about these are real people, not statistics, and it's about really trying to listen to them and really focus on what their needs are and respond to their needs. And again, it's this use of partnerships. The forward transition down in Geelong, I spoke to the coordinator there. I think it's in one of the little reports that are in the NCVER document. A wonderful quote he gave me of all the people that he worked with to make everything happen on behalf of the workers. Now, there were a lot of open access programs. I'm just giving you an idea of what we found in the various places. Some of them are similar, so I'll just go to the next slide of just showing how we listed them. Now, they all included pre-training, training, post-training steps. And here is where the tasks were the same. We've been told about the tasks, but this is more the mechanisms of how to actually have this happen. And that's what became interesting, was the mechanisms. There is the rapid response teams. Now, BHP, way back when it, the steelworks and so on, there is a rapid response team that grew out of that. It's actually a private enterprise these days. And it makes up a group of people, and the idea is you go very early, as soon as you hear that there is going to be a closure, and I understand now that I think over 15 employees involved in a industry restructuring. I think you have to let Centrelink and a few other people know. So there are channels by which you can work up your rapid response. There's good examples in Tasmania, who also have a rapid response team. I think it's the Tasmanian one. Skills Tasmania is linked with that. It involves other agencies. And in our main report, we've included their little checklist. This is the rapid response team. They go in and go through this whole steps, which could be added to, but there's a start for anyone that wants to grab that out of that document and start from there in putting something together. There's the workforce development centres now. One was set up in Geelong. There's a couple of others in Victoria that are linked with the Automotive. There can be some others. A one-stop shop. I don't know whether I'm right. Did I read something recently in Victoria? There's some sort of, is it job and career something or others coming into the TAFEs, little units, right? So that's the same thing. You go in and you can get anything that I just spoke about. People would help you with what you need at that particular point in time. So that's the one-stop shop. And of course, this is very important for those that aren't in these larger industry structural programs. This is for anyone who can walk in the door with these things, including the spouse and so on and so forth. There is the Job Services Network, now the Job Actives from the 1st of July. I'm not putting too big a dampener on them, but displaced workers are not long-term unemployed. They use the job network, they have been there, but it's a bit like our previous speaker saying, it's such a process-oriented step-by-step that, and they rattle off all this. One of them said, she rattled all this information, none of it was relevant to me, and then she said, go over there and have a look start looking in the computer while I finish writing out who you are and all of that, and we'll come back next week. Well, they don't want to come back next week. They can do that themselves. They want here and now advice, and that is suited to them. So that was, then the other thing we found are quite a few, again, part of the regional response, regional labour workforce websites. Hunter has a couple of websites which is all about local employers putting up what work there is, and local people aiming for that work. Geelong also has a Geelong Careers website. And I'd just like to say, for those that talked, and Geelong, what I liked about Geelong was they were also helping workers leave the region to get a job. If you're in our region now and we can't get you one here, we'll help you find one elsewhere, which I thought was just terrific, really. So the other part of this is the parallel new jobs creation. As John was saying earlier, there aren't jobs now, so you can train all you like, but if there's no job the other end, it's a bit hard. Right now we need all of the things that I've mentioned so far you could call capacity building of the worker themselves. We also need to capacity build the actual economy, if you like, through, and so that is a very important parallel activity that must go on. Now, some of these parallel, we heard earlier, the idea of anyone that's coming in for large infrastructure projects, be they housing or whatever, the jobs go locally. Everyone's trying to get a regional procurement in the contracts for that kind of work to help the workers. They also, some of them have regional innovation investment programs. And then the idea of interconnecting some of these new job creation with the displaced worker, knowing how they fit together. Now, I think Gordon Tafe might be talking a little bit about those kinds of things this afternoon. Now, the customised projects. We found a few. These are the ones that we found. And now I'll just talk briefly about them as they fit in our three-stage process. Now, at the pre-training stage, we found industry taster programs, exactly what we were talking before. Displaced workers, well, where am I going to get a job? Which are the growth industries in this area? And I know they were doing it in Newcastle, in that area earlier. They've been doing it down in Geelong through the local learning and employment network. I think there's someone here who will speak a bit more about what they're doing. But there's two levels of them. One was a short, sharp, here's 6 growth industries. We'll tell you a little bit about each. Then there was another one which was more detailed. All right, you've decided community services, aged care, all this sort of thing might suit you. And then it was more detailed, and they'll actually take them out to quite a few sites, talk to the employer, talk to employees, so they get a really good feel. And one thing that a retrenched worker really likes is actually being able to shake a potential new employer's hand. That's the one good thing they do want. They don't, they won't go to a job fest unless there's real employers there with real jobs. What's the point, as they say? And that was the one thing they really liked. So there's 2 levels of those kinds of industry taster programs to give people some ideas about that. And if I could just say, yes, some of the workers I spoke to had decided to go into aged care. And one chap I spoke to, it was less work and so on, less money, sorry. But in he went, finished the whole Cert 3, got into the industry, got a job, and then got discriminated against by all the other women that he worked with, to such a point that he quit. So discrimination goes across a lot of different areas. So if you're trying to insert into a female or the male industry, which you've got to also keep in mind, you can run across quite a few different issues that you may not have thought about. So everyone's different, so there's quite a lot to have to consider. Training, obviously, we're talking about some workers that might need literacy, foundation, employability, all those sorts of skills, as well as new technical skills. I also mentioned the life skills. Tasmania does a terrific job in some of the programs they've got. Remember, a retrenched worker who might decide to retire still wants to be productive. And so there's still a place for them to help them in their retirement. Showcasing available jobs, and volunteering is another way, and there's volunteering organisations everywhere. Volunteering is another potential step. And there's social connections to maintain morale. Now, a lot of people I spoke to, Qantas 4-star down at Geelong at the airport, they were a smaller group, they really didn't get much support. They see each other still. It's moral support. It's having someone to go and talk to so that you're not spending 7 days thinking about it yourself and getting more and more down, that you've actually got a few other people, and that is really, really important. And the unions, I noticed, were also a place. A lot of workers would come together to talk things over and just keep things going. We do know a DOME is don't overlook mature-aged employees. That's what that stands for. It's legislated so that it can focus on, discriminate favourably for mature-aged, and it was doing all of these things that we're talking about. And of course, an older worker loves it when they can go somewhere and know that all the people on that database of employers are looking for an older worker. And that was an added bonus for them. Now, when you talk to the workers themselves, they've had a hard time of it. They've told me it's been tough. And a lot of them aren't where they want to be, and probably will never be again where they want to be in terms of their employment. But they are employed. And they can't stress enough about starting early. First of all, you've got to decide, well, what might be possible, a couple of options. And then, if you're going to do some training, you've got to do it. So if you wait until you're out the door and retrenched, you've already got an area that some time is lost. They all were very grateful for all the services that they had received. But they were very aware that you have to stand up on your own. You need your own personal networks. This is about cold calling. This is about networking to find a friend of a friend that has a piece of work that you can do. And that had taken some time, but they had then very quickly realised just how important that is. Qualifications do matter, training does matter, and talking to peers. Now, this last bit is all in a lovely infographic that NCVER did as a value add to our work. So I'm not going to take you through that. I wasn't sure how much time I'd have. So if you just read that, that's what I'm focusing on here. These principles are all to do with the characteristics of an older worker over 45 in particular, with less skills. Full set of tasks that potentially in the pre-training stage. Full set of tasks through the training stage, with a bit more detail about the nature of the training. Full set of tasks through the post-training stage. And just to finish off, roles for vet providers. Now, I think vocational education training providers could play a big role. They could play some more of the upfront role, certainly in the RPL step, extremely important, all the way through training, and potentially out the other end with linking people to employers. I do, though, wonder and like to put out the challenge that to be part of the rapid response team and even to be a leader within it, given that the core is retraining and retraining, but with other very, very important components around it. Thank you very much.
Just before we break for morning tea, are there any quick questions from the floor for Kaye while she's up on the podium?
Yay. Oh.
Just really not really a question, but I just wanted to take time to defend vet providers that they hear. One of the complexities of what you're talking about is the funding arrangements that are coming into place under Skills for All and Victorian Training Guarantee. That skill sets are still not a commitment from either governments to actually fund. So we are still forcing people into qualifications that aren't necessary for displaced workers.
Yes,
I would also like to defend job service providers. I think that the new job active contract has been forced upon them also, and they can find to work in a very tight contract with 30% now less funding than the last contract. And there are some very good examples of job service providers doing a good job out there within the constraints of that contract.
Right. I'm willing to say that. I'm just saying that I'm trying to contrast a displaced worker with a long-term unemployed. And you don't treat them in the same way, I don't think, when they walk through the door. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. The other thing, which is only anecdotal, about the job actives, because they do a good job. They've all been to them and, they've got things out of it. But I had to make that comment because so many of them did to me about their own personal experience of trying to deal with Job Network. My understanding with Job Active is that, it's a reflection of what they're asked to do. It's not a reflection of the workers involved in it. There seems to be less money for training. They're focused very much on job, and they seem to be a bit less focused on having draining dollars at the moment. And so it's not just inside vet and how it's funded. It's a wider issue. And when I mentioned whether they will or won't fund tickets and things like that, I'm talking about in Adelaide, the workers' transition program, at least for the hold and support workers, they will not fund tickets. So that's got nothing to do with the vet sector, because this is through the structural adjustment. I don't know why they're not doing that, but you do notice these differences. And so I'm just pointing them out. But yes, I don't mean to say there isn't good work done by all these people. I'm just reflecting from a retrenched workers point of view, There's nothing worse also than walking in as a woman and being told, step one, to get assistance, go over to the computer and log yourself in and sign up. This woman didn't know how to use a computer. Pretty soul-destroying, So, anyway, but there is a lot of terrific work being done. All of the 4 sites that we worked in have built up over the years, have learnt. I don't know that there's much more in the global that you could come up with. It's all in trying to practice it and get it happening on the ground. Thank you.